Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Tonight we have the Facilities and Finance Committee meeting here at the School District of Waukesha. First item of business, was the meeting properly posted?
It was.
Good. And the second item of business is opportunities for citizens to speak. And we do have an agenda item on tonight. I think we can start that by any citizens that are here to speak can speak to that topic now. Would probably be the best time, or any other topic they feel like speaking to. Make sure you state your name and address when you come to speak.
Okay, where would you like me to speak from?
There's a microphone right in front of you, if you
Right
look at that little speaker phone.
Alrighty. Okay, my name is Peggy Nowak.
Okay, you're first on the list. Thanks, Darren.
There we go, we're right in order. I live at South 50, West 23525 Woodchuck Lane. First of all, I would like to thank the board and the people here tonight for listening to our concerns regarding the busing situation and busing the students in the Mill Creek subdivision. I have been a resident of the Waukesha School District for 25 years. In fact, my husband and I built our home at the end of Woodchuck Lane. We have three grown children that have gone through the Waukesha School District and have graduated from the district and are quite successful. And currently I have two grandchildren that are living with me, and one is a kindergartner. So that kind of brings me to this particular topic. In 1990, our oldest daughter began kindergarten. She was bused. The bus came all the way down Woodchuck Lane, picked her up, and that process continued for 21 years. Of course, we had a lot more students and children in the subdivision at that particular time. In 2011, our subdivision is growing older. We did not have any, to my knowledge, elementary children down on our end on the back side of this particular subdivision. So in 2011, we know the change. The bus stop was changed to what it is currently at Berlin Lane and Mill Creek Trail. Okay, so that's the current pickup point right now. There was no time during those 21 years that we had a problem with the bus navigating the cul-de-sac. In fact, the cul-de-sac is 120 feet in diameter. A bus is 40 feet. And the bus would come right around, never had to do a wide turn to our knowledge in order to get out of that particular cul-de-sac. And at one point, we were picking up probably 12 to 15 children down at the end cul-de-sac. Basically, the subdivision was developed in 1987, and the cul-de-sacs were put in for your emergency vehicles, which include your ladder trucks, okay, which many of you know are quite large to turn around and not have to do a wide turn in the cul-de-sac. So basically 21 years we didn't have any problems with that, and I'm assuming the Waukesha School District had set up the bus route for the safety of the children down on that end to come down to the end of Woodchuck Lane. Currently, we have two kindergartners down on our end and one middle school student that are living near the end of Woodchuck Lane. The current bus stop is at Merlin and Mill Creek, as I mentioned. So right now, the stop is picking up the two kindergartners at Merlin Lane and Mill Creek, which is about a half mile from their homes. 0.4 of a mile to a half mile to their homes. So those two children are being picked up there. Next year, we know that there's going to be two more little ones on the back side of the subdivision. And we do have two houses for sale in our subdivision, so who knows? We're seeing a turnover now, so we're going to be having more students down at the back side. We also know that the bus run for these children, they are getting to school at about 8:10 to 8:15 every day. So we know timing is not of an issue. In talking to the Principal Schneider, that basically this bus is picking up the children at 8 o'clock and they're at school by 8:10 to 8:15. In August, we received the bus pick-up and drop-off card, and that's when we did fill out the card to do the bus change request. And that was emailed to the district at 9:20 at night. Believe it or not, we had a response at 11:50 that night that they were denying our request, which I guess was kind of disheartening because we felt maybe the bus company would be consulted and so on in making that particular decision. And we were told that buses do not travel down dead end or cul-de-sacs when absolutely possible, okay? We also know that at the last board meeting on November 11th, Superintendent Gray did state that there are some instances in our district where buses do travel down the long cul-de-sacs, and I think ours would be classified right in a long cul-de-sac. Basically, that we do have busing, there's 2 or 3 instances where we do have busing in the district that does accommodate those children. Basically, we feel that the situation that we have, where our children are a half mile, we do not have sidewalks in our subdivision. We do not have shoulders in our subdivision. They are winding roads coming around, that we do qualify as one of these situations that is an exception for the district to take a look at. So what we are doing is we're asking the district to set up a bus stop on the back side of the subdivision to accommodate some of these students. And we don't mind walking a short distance, but if you've walked 5/10 of a mile with a kindergartner, it can be quite cumbersome. So we're taking a look at the safety, of course, of the utmost. Not only do we have the people that signed the appeal, but we did ask our subdivision, the people in the subdivision asked basically, do you have problems, with if we were the busing situation? And most of them agreed with us because our kids had all been picked up previously by the bus. So I do have for you in a petition that was set. So we have 52 names on this petition, 33 households from our subdivision that do agree with the appeal that is before you in taking a look at a change of a bus stop in the Mill Creek subdivision. So if I hand that to you.
Just hand it to Mr. Edlin. He'll pass it on. Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Ms. Novak.
Thank you.
Next on the list is Carrie Cerny.
Good evening. So my name is Carrie Cerny, and I live at South 50 West 23475 Woodchuck Lane. I was the original requester of the additional bus stop in Mill Creek subdivision. I followed, I think, Danielle, who requested the original bus stop to be added. I spoke to Yvonne days after the denial, and she stated to me that buses do not turn around in cul-de-sacs, and that's a policy in the Waukesha School District. I've reviewed your transportation policy. We went through proper channels to proceed with the process. We were denied. We submitted to Mr. Cook. We were denied. We submitted to the entire board. We were denied. So at this point in time, in one of my emails, I had requested that I needed more information from the safety survey from the Sheriff's Department. Yvonne and Mr. Cook contacted the Sheriff's Department. A safety study was conducted. It was conducted by Sergeant Pavlovac in our subdivision. He sat in our subdivision for 4 consecutive days, documented traffic, documented times, locations of where the kids were, who they were being escorted by, drop-offs, miles per hour of traveling traffic that was coming through. The safety survey that was submitted did not state whether the subdivision was deemed hazardous or safe. So clarification was made with a supplemental safety survey and a statement in this survey. I don't know if any of you have read this or reviewed this, but it does state that in the deputy's opinion, it is unreasonable to expect a 5-year-old to walk unescorted that distance with the above listed factors present. For the reasons above, I do believe hazardous conditions exist and that buses should be allowed to utilize the cul-de-sac in question to pick up students and turn around while exercising all due regard. So at this point in time, safety is the biggest concern for all of us. I'm a mother of 4 children. They range in age from 14 to 6 months. I will have 3 children next year in the Waukesha School District. 1 will be a high schooler and 2 will be in elementary school. So for me to stress to you the concern of safety of this stop being a half mile away from our homes, it's just, it's not reasonable, it's not safe. The sheriff's department was asked to come out, there's your professional opinion. They've given their professional opinion, they feel that there are hazards that exist, it's dangerous. So now we're asking for an additional stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Randall Cerny.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Randall Cerny. I live at South 50 West 23475 Woodchuck Lane. Basically, my wife was just up here speaking. Pretty much have the same exact concerns she does. My biggest issue is the safety issue of the stop. Again, there's no sidewalks in our subdivision. I know when we're standing out there with our children, you know, come winter time with the snow, there's really nowhere good to stand. It's not a real busy intersection, but it's probably the busiest intersection in that subdivision. There's just really no good spot for these kids to be standing at that subdivision. There's only one stop sign for the four-way intersection. So one of my biggest concerns is just kind of standing out there, and even when we drive our kids there, you know, I have my car parked on the road. I'm not gonna be able to stop a car from swerving on the ice and hitting my kids. So that's, you know, a big concern of mine. And again, with talking with other people in the subdivision, it seems like there's always been buses that have come down in the cul-de-sacs, and I've never heard anyone give a good reason why they wouldn't be able to. So, I don't know, we just really want the stop to be moved. Like my wife said, we've got 4 kids altogether. You know, 2 of them are currently in school. The 6-month-old, you know, we're gonna have 2 more kids coming into the school district. So this, you know, we're gonna be there for a while. We're gonna have kids riding the bus for years to come now. So it's a pretty big concern for us to be taking our kids up to this stop. And I guess I just always kind of wonder if it were somebody else's kids and they were where we were, would they ask the same thing? That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Is there anyone else who'd like to present to the committee at this time?
I would like to just answer any questions the board has relating to the survey. My name is Lieutenant Paul J. Beal with the
Okay,
Waukesha County
well,
Sheriff's
Why
Department.
don't you just hold on there for a
Okay.
second, and what we'll do is, if we're done with the citizens to speak, we'll move on to our action
Okay.
items, and because you're an information provider to the case, rather, I mean, we'll certainly decide whether we need to ask you some clarifying questions. I'm sure there will be, so I appreciate you coming
Great.
tonight. Any other citizens like to speak at this time? Okay. With that being said, we'll move on to our action item tonight, consideration of the transportation appeal from Mill Creek subdivision. Any of the committee members like to start, or at this point in time with any questions? Mr. Cook, would you present the administration's point of view on this issue?
Yes, thank you. Just taking a little bit of time here to look at when this first came to my attention, which was at the end of September at that time. And to reiterate what was said, we did request a safety study. We exchanged some emails and had some phone conversations. Upon the initial request for stop change, I did have to look into it with Yvonne Johnson, our transportation coordinator, who did inform me of where the stop was located. She presented me with a map that did show the cul-de-sac. Past practice in the district has been not to send buses into cul-de-sacs unless it is the only safe stop for the students. The district held at that time that this was a safe stop, but we did request a safety study with the sheriff's department. At the time that we got the first report from the sheriff's department, We held that it continued to be a safe bus stop, that we could, families could bring their kids down there and keep them supervised. A few weeks later, we did receive a supplemental document from the sheriff's department, and it was at that time that a request came in for us to reconsider. We held to our decision, but then did share information with the families on the appeal process to the F&F committee. As part of this process, Yvonne Johnson and I did spend time in the subdivision. We looked at this subdivision, but also similar township subdivisions where there are bus stops and stops that have been declared stops that do not possess any unusual hazards, which is the term that the other safety reports presented to us. And we are here tonight. We could take a look at, if you'd like, some of the points that were made in the supplemental report as they pertain to school pickup and drop-off times, as well as what is the current sunrise and sunset calendar.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cope. Any questions from committee members at this time? Clarifications on the officer's report, or anybody do their own investigation, or? Ms. Madden?
I just have a couple of questions, Joe, about the pickup times.
Correct.
And is it a two-tier or one-tier? And
It's a two-tier. There's an elementary pickup time and a secondary pickup time. Elementary pickup time is approximately 8 a.m. With a drop-off time of about 4:08 p.m. Our bus pickup time at the secondary level is 6:48 a.m. Drop-off time for the secondary level is about 2:55 p.m.
when you did your study with the bus company, how many other subdivisions are in this category? About?
We have about 350 cul-de-sacs in Waukesha. Yvonne and I drove through about a half dozen of them, where 3, 4, 5 years ago, safety studies were conducted. They were of a similar layout where children would have to walk down a lightly traveled road without sidewalks to a central pickup location. Those subdivisions were very similar in nature to the one at question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I recall sitting in on one of those hearings one time. We used to have these quite frequently where there would be appeals. We haven't had one for a while, so it's kind of a new experience for some of the committee members and actually for the administration to have an appeal, but certainly we welcome it. I mean, we don't discourage people from following the process, which you've done, and we're glad people came tonight. Any further questions from anyone on the committee? Mr. McCaffrey?
So the pickup is on the corner of Merlin and Mill Creek Trail?
Correct.
How does the bus get out of there?
There's a turn that the bus is able then to follow the thoroughfare. That does not have to go into a cul-de-sac for a turnaround.
Merlin runs parallel to I.
Yep.
So you turn off I, and then you can come back and turn back on I. So it's either you can come up and over, or you can just come around and just loop out. So rather than picking them up on I, they're picked up on.
So they come in and they go out on Big Bend Road?
Well,
Is that
I
the
don't know if
because
they
I'm
go out
looking
on
at a
Big
map
Bend. I
right
think
here.
they come in and out on I.
Because I'm looking at a map on my Google Maps,
Yep.
which is a little bit better than this one. And it looks like you come off of Mill Creek Trail off of I,
Right.
and I don't see how you get out unless you're doing a turnaround in one of these cul-de-sacs on this map.
Well, you'd come out the Big Bend Road, I
You
think.
come out on Big Bend Road,
Yeah,
that's where you come out,
that-
okay.
I saw the routing, and you have to either come out on Big Bend Road.
Or you have, yeah, right, okay.
Or you come in on Big Bend Road.
Or you can come in on Big Bend Road. Is that how they come in? Do we know? They come in on Big Bend and out on
I would have to
Lonsdale?
double check the flow of traffic there.
Because that I'd like to know. I mean, if they're, I mean, my concern would be, is if we're telling these people they can't turn around in a cul-de-sac, and we're turning around in a cul-de-sac to get out of the thing.
We are not turning around in a cul-de-sac here.
Because that would make us look kind of stupid. Okay. So I'd like to know which way they're coming in and out.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious to me that they were coming.
That's what I'm thinking
Yeah.
too, but I just want,
Can I-
you know
can
me,
I
I just
say
making
something?
sure.
Because I have seen buses turn around in the cul-de-sac.
That particular, that,
I have followed the bus. and
excuse me,
seen the
excuse
bus
me.
Turn around in a cul-de-sac.
Excuse me, we'd like to just continue our
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
asked if I could speak, and I said, yeah, so.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want to know which way they come in?
No, no, not right now.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd like the district administrator to tell me
Okay.
that information, so,
Okay.
so we're not sure. Rachel?
Correct, without having the flow of traffic map, I couldn't speak to that, no. They do not turn around, the route is not routed for a cul-de-sac
Right.
turnaround there.
So we're assuming they're coming in on one and out on.
They're coming in on one, they're going out on the other.
Okay.
There are
That's what they're supposed to be doing.
What's that? Which
That's
is
what
what they're
they're-
supposed to be
that's
doing.
what they're supposed to do,
Yeah, That is what they're supposed to be doing. And speaking with Rob Schulke, the manager for First Student, that is the message that's sent out through their safety team, only in designated cul-de-sacs will a
Okay.
bus go down or a dead end.
Okay. And that's why the stop is on Mill Creek and Merlin, because Merlin is the way out.
Correct.
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't show the other part
Yeah,
of
they
the
don't
map.
show it on this map.
If you
That's why I had to
if you
punch it
saw
out.
the other part of the map, it'd be pretty obvious.
You can see it.
Yeah, you can see it right here.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So. Mr. Edlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Quick, you stated that there's 300 and some cul-de-sacs in Waukesha, but the ones that you looked at were similar in nature to this, where you have approximately a half-mile trip to get from the last cul-de-sac on this dead-end road to get back. You know how many other cul-de-sacs? I hate to even call this a cul-de-sac because it's a dead-end road. You know, I don't know how you I don't know the proper terminology for it. I've always thought of a cul-de-sac as, you know, what we're seeing just a little bit ahead of that on Woodchuck Lane.
We had went to cul-de-sacs that had recent safety studies that we had on record to show what was deemed to have unusual hazardous conditions, but then ones that have also been deemed to not have unusually hazardous conditions. And so without going beyond that 6, I couldn't speak to the nature of it. We do have a few of the stops that we were at were off of what would be county highway-ish roads, 45 miles an hour, where the traffic could be traveling, and that would have been the nearest pickup for kids. We didn't designate a stop at that, we did go in. We do have a few where there are 35-mile-an-hour zones where kids are being picked up, but the sheriff's department has deemed those to not possess unusually hazardous conditions because the bus is able to move over there.
Thank you.
Mr. Como?
I'd like to ask Lieutenant Beal to come on forward, just a couple questions. Appreciate you being here tonight, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciated the detail provided in the reports by the person, the deputy who had actually done them. I did just some really quick calculations, just trying to figure out about how often do cars pass. Get sort of a sense of that. And it looked like a car would pass morning and evenings were roughly the same, not too much difference, but a little bit. It looked like one car would pass every maybe 3 to 6 minutes, if you average things out. Now, that's an average. Now, 2 might come in a row, or then you won't see any for 8 minutes or whatever. And so I just kind of did some quick math on there. And when I finished reading the first report, seemed like it was pretty neutral in the findings, in particular with the traffic. That's one of the things that we look at is how much traffic is there. So when we had the supplemental report, I'm just trying to understand how the supplemental report came about. You know, who requested it? Did the person just change their mind, or what's going on there in terms of the supplemental report and how that came about?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because that's part of the issue here. Initially, Deputy Pavlovich, Mike Pavlovich, conducted the safety stop here. We did, I believe, 4 at that time for Waukesha School District. Initially, I've never been involved with one of these before as a supervisor. The deputies that conducted all these had never done them. So being that we base everything on a law for what we do. I sought direction on it from DPI. I said, do we have guidelines and standards on what this should, how this should be created or fashioned, or what are we looking for? And I just reviewed my email before I came here today from a person at DPI that was supposed to answer that question, and my email says that they have no guidelines, which we know is not correct. So initially, what I instructed the deputies to do was review our internal reports on it for the formatting, because Deputy Carpenter, Dave Carpenter, had done these for probably 30 years. Deputy Carpenter worked for 41 years and retired about 3 years ago. And so I actually called Deputy Carpenter, retired Deputy Carpenter, and sought some instruction on this. And he referenced Chapter 121, which is basically the appeals process, I think, for this process. But, so we did locate the guidelines, and from the beginning of that report until the supplemental report, we actually were able to get the guidelines from DPI on our own, and we readdressed the issue. And I told Deputy Pavlovich, I would like you to supplement your report indicating whether or not you believe that it's unusually hazardous, is which the guidelines under DPI say. So it wasn't providing any new information. It was speaking to whether or not there were any unusually hazardous conditions present that would warrant that not to be a good place to stop. The issue that it's 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 miles to that stop it should not be part of that, his assessment, because the guidelines from the state say it's 2 miles. So now we know that, and that was the only thing that he should have spoke to. So in speaking to that issue, it shouldn't be addressed there, because that's not an unusually hazardous condition to have the child walk 0.3 to 0.5 tenths of a mile, based on the state DPI guidelines. That's all that was supposed to speak to, because Ms. Cerny did call me and question me about it and said, hey, this is pretty open, it doesn't really say one way or another. And so a lot of this information flow and the information from DPI came in during the time this report was prepared. So does that clarify it? Or?
So it is not an unusually hazardous.
Based on reviewing the state guidelines that I reviewed myself, there is nothing there that is unusually hazardous to that location of that bus stop.
Okay.
I mean, and I've talked to Ms. Cerny and addressed the issue of the distance. The distance alone does not make a bus stop hazardous.
What are some things that would make it unusually hazardous?
Well, we just did one for Kettle Moraine School District on Highway 83, south of the Big Hill by Mary Court in the town of Delafield, south of I-94, where the hill goes down, and they had a bus stop right there. Now, we've had we just had a head-on accident there this weekend. That was a location initially of that bus stop this year, and they didn't want to pull off 83. Well, after we did the survey and provided some data on accidents and citation issuance, and the fact that the road has changed there, it goes from 4-lane to 2-lane, and we've had a lot of speeding violations there. They changed the location. We did another one on Guthrie. Another Deputy Powell did one during the same time frame. We had 1,600 cars going through in 1 hour, or during the time frame, the kids would be picked up for, part of the issue was a tunnel that closed. And he's like, 1,600 cars, and people aren't stopping at the lights, people are turning, it's that was hazardous, and that was deemed unusually hazardous for kids to cross there.
Okay. And you had mentioned a few of those things like higher volume traffic, so on and so forth. And in the beginning, part of the initial report, didn't see there were no recent accidents,
No.
or how far back do you go to check for accidents? And
Our database goes back on computer at least 15 years.
okay. And I was just going through that initial report that didn't seem like there was any real concerns there, so.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just hold on, I have a couple questions. Have you been out there and driven that area yourself?
I've been in that area.
As part of this?
Not as part of this. I worked for the Sheriff's Department for 28 years, so I patrolled that area
But
for
if you
quite a
were,
length of time.
if you were sent out there for this purpose, you'd look a little closer at things like,
I reviewed the aerial survey of the subdivision. I'm familiar with the location.
Okay.
I did not respond out there for this assessment, correct?
Well, I drove out there a few weeks back, right after when this looked like it was going to come to the committee. And I'm familiar with some of the past ones we've done where there's been a cul-de-sac issue, and they wanted us to drive into the cul-de-sac, and we denied it. On a much more busier road, I think it was like on Town Line Road is where we were picking kids up at the time. And we still picked up kids on Town Line Road. It'd be like picking them up on I here. So I would say that picking them up on I would not be a good idea. Picking them up where we're picking them up is much better than I.
Correct.
Not as good as picking them up in your cul-de-sac. Obviously, it can get better all the way through. When I went out there, there was a couple things I noticed. When we say there's no shoulders, well, I guess technically there's not a maintained shoulder there, but there's a very large flat area to walk. It's not like you're gonna have to go out down in a ditch to walk the road up to that stop. And then on the stop, it's the reason there's only one stop sign, because there's hardly any traffic at that stop. You're coming off of a set of cul-de-sacs, some of them not very heavily populated at all. I think one might, I don't know if it's not buildable, but there's hardly even a house on one of the cul-de-sacs. And the intersection there's a lot of space there. It's not like you have to stand in a ditch or on a culvert. I mean, there's lots of open area to stand and away from traffic. So it was like, compared to what I have, and I live in the town of Waukesha too, and I don't have sidewalks, and we have hills where people can slide down and lose control. Relative to what I saw there, it was safer than most of the pickup spots in my own subdivision. And the number of houses the concentration and density of houses on that cul-de-sac, it's kind of a rural area, if you look at it from the aerial. You're not going to see a lot of traffic coming on the road in which these children would be walking. Understandably, a 5-year-old's a little different than as they get older, there's a little bit more comfort level with children walking that road. But relative to elsewhere in our district, if we were to change for this one, I wonder how many others we'd have to change for, because relatively speaking, I looked at it and it didn't look like it was that unsafe for the average child. 5-year-old, I would assume many parents would either want to accompany that child or make sure they're accompanied to the stop, but that wouldn't be an unusual expectation for a family to do that. So that was what I saw from looking at the overall area. I guess maybe we don't call a shoulder that's not maintained a shoulder, but I mean, if I was to lose control of my car or drop my wheel off the edge of the pavement, I'm still on a flat area for quite a distance. And so it's not like you can't get freely. And then I looked at the guidelines. I pulled up a website for safe walking to school. There's and just to make sure I had the facts right, you'd walk against traffic if you're walking safely on a road. Well, against traffic in the morning, how many people would be coming into that subdivision? Probably not too many. I mean, there's not that many houses. Most people would be going out. And it just doesn't seem like a very high traffic area either, because you got an empty cul-de-sac, or a cul-de-sac that's relatively short as one of the parts of that subdivision, and then you're feeding from the other cul-de-sacs. Plus, if you're going to come out, you'd probably come out the Big Bend Road or I, going the other way. You wouldn't turn up there and go up the I that often unless you were going to go farther towards Milwaukee. So when you just look at the overall layout compared to what we have, it just didn't seem that hazardous.
I would agree. And I mean, I think Deputy Pavlovich indicated approximately 12 cars in that time frame while he was there, and so.
The other thing was about the lightness or the darkness, and sun comes up well before the pickup time at 8 o'clock. And I assume there's times when it does get dark depending upon daylight savings time and stuff like that. But relatively speaking, it's a very open area, and most of the time, it would be at 8 o'clock reasonably well lit from daylight.
I would agree.
And it didn't seem to be hindered by trees or anything like that. And to the north of it, there's like a horse farm or something. It's a very rural area, even by town of Waukesha standards for subdivisions. So. Any other questions from the committee?
No.
Mr. Edlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We heard tonight that the district used to make runs into the subdivision from some parents who had children who lived in the subdivision. Do you know when we changed that policy, or that practice, would be a better word?
It's been shared with me that that's always been the practice. I can speak to some transportation conversations that happened 4 or 5 years ago when we went from Dairyland to first student busing. I think they re-examined routes at that time. So within the last 4 or 5 years, there was substantial work done on the routes, the changeover with the transportation company. I can't speak beyond that, though.
Okay.
It was shared with me that it was always practice not to go into cul-de-sacs.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, virtually every route was re-examined when we changed companies. And we had the ability to actually do that, where in the past, we had some software also now that we have access to help us to take a look at all that and to even do some comparison work. So that's really when I think the heavy-duty works happened.
Any other questions? Thank you, officer.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming and the clarification. Well, like I said, we used to do these quite a bit. I think one night I was in the committee years ago, we had 4 of them from 4 different requests, and one of them was the cul-de-sac one that night. And I think we accepted one appeal, which we, normally the administration wins out, but not always. And that appeal, it so happened because I did check out that area. It was at the bottom of the hill. It looked to me like there's a danger of cars losing control right where the kids were standing if the roads were icy conditions. And in fact, I know people have slid through that intersection. And the bus goes right by where the requested stop was, so it didn't seem to be onerous to change the pickup point, basically putting it at the top of the hill instead of the bottom of the hill. So it's not that these things don't get changed by committee, but for the most part, we have to look at the overall situation and make a decision relative to it. Mr. Como?
Yeah, our policy really has us look at 3 things: safety, efficiency of the routes, and what does it cost? And those are the things that are kind of running through my mind right now. I had seen that we had some information, and I don't recall who requested the information, Joe, but on cost. If we were to, just to round out the information here a little bit, if we were to implement just 1/4 of the cul-de-sacs,
Correct.
we would be looking at additional buses. Each bus costs us roughly $44,000 to run.
Correct.
Each year. We'd be looking at, just if we did 1/4 of those cul-de-sacs, so from a cost perspective, it cost us almost $1.9 million just to do 1/4 of those. It's a pretty significant cost. So when I take a look at this, I think this is an important decision that we have to make here, because it's a precedent-setting kind of decision that we would be making. And I would be concerned that there would be many more cul-de-sacs such as this one that we would have to, if we were going to be fair to everybody in the district, we would really have to increase our busing costs. Is that fair to say, Joe?
There would be, if we had to address, there would be a cost component to this. But I think, reflecting back on our past practice and additional safety studies of neighborhoods with cul-de-sacs, the comment about an unusually hazardous condition being present, the safety piece is the piece that we're looking at, that I looked at most closely with this, and the ability to get to the bus stop safely is part of it, but also where are we picking up the student?
Yeah. One of my other concerns about looking at a safety study too, right now, with respect to the cul-de-sac, I grew up on a cul-de-sac, and when the snow gets plowed and when there are people parking, and I don't know what kind of parking is done in this cul-de-sac and or others, it can be pretty tight. I mean, there were even times where we had issues with cars and bigger, just trucks getting in and out and around. So we don't really have, that's one of the reasons why we don't go into cul-de-sacs. And yeah, when it's dry and clean, and do they have the ability to turn around? Can buses turn around? I think under the best conditions, in most cases, they can. When I look at the amount of traffic here, again, I was looking at the number of cars, and I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. O'Brien, was that, you're walking against traffic and most of those cars will be exiting. The amount of traffic here, to me, does not warrant to actually go down, I can't remember the name of the street now. Woodchuck Lane. I just don't think it does. It's pretty minimal. When we take a look at some of the other studies that we've done and compared it to unusually hazardous conditions, usually we're looking at sometimes thousands and tens of thousands of cars that are going past a particular point. Those I know we've made changes on.
Correct. The one that Lieutenant Beal just referenced, the bus was added to that section of town.
Yeah.
Was added last week.
I remember students crossing Northview. There was one, people didn't want to cross Northview. That was, I think that traffic was 17,000 cars per day. That was huge. They took that out to the corner of Grandview and Northview for that. And I think the way we remedied that was with a safety guard or a crossing guard, and that's in place right now. So just looking at the safety, looking at the economics here, I'm going to make a motion to deny the request of the parents of Mill Creek subdivision to change the bus stop.
Motion from Mr. Como, do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Madden. Any further discussion? Mr. Edlin?
I want everybody to know that I personally came here with a very open mind tonight, and I put a tremendous amount of weight on the officer's report, the amended report. But I did so with caution because there seems to be a lot of emphasis in this request placed on a 5-year-old child. And I understand that because the child is short to begin with, hard to see, walking a half a mile. But where do you draw the line? That child's going to grow up, and then when do you say, at a certain age, we're no longer going to pick up children because they're now taller, they're able to walk the half a mile, and unfortunately tonight, for the petitioners, we heard from the officer that it was not deemed to be a safety hazard, and that emphasis was placed on if the child had to walk 2 miles. That's a whole long way. Our family didn't fall within that 2-mile range, and it was quite a distance to go to school. My wife drove the kids every day. And that was a safety consideration on our part, and we made that choice. I certainly wouldn't let my 5-year-old child walk a half mile, particularly when the weather's extremely cold out, and all the concerns that we have in society today. It's just something that you really have to be concerned about. And for those reasons, One part of me wants to say I support what you're doing, but I have to follow and put a lot of emphasis on the officer's report tonight. So I will not be, I will be supporting the motion to deny.
Yeah, I just want to comment a little bit. I mean, I've been on this board for a little while, not as long as some of the members here, and I've been off it for a little while too. And I look back at probably the things I've championed and been most proud of, and most proud of I've been is safety issues. And I look at West High School where we put the stoplight out after a young girl was injured, and it should have been done long before that. So when someone brings a safety issue, and that's why I'm glad you're here tonight, you should bring these issues to us, as should any other parent. It's important that we don't ignore the request and that you don't feel uncomfortable bringing those concerns to us. There was even in the decision at West, there were some board members and some community members that said, what's wrong with that board pushing to have going ahead with these lights out at West, and you're going to spend money. Well, spending money is not a problem when it comes to safety in a hazardous situation. I also don't put much weight on whether we can turn around in a cul-de-sac or not. I would concur with your points that we can turn in a cul-de-sac. I mean, that's not, to me, that's not the driving issue here. And it was important enough for me, I did want to go out and take a look at what was out there to see the situation. And based on that, it really kind of shocked me when, we had the supplemental that was something like a hazardous condition compared to what I'm accustomed to living in the town of Waukesha. And I kind of share views with Mr. Edlin on this. Certainly, I know my wife, and I know any other mother, their 5-year-old's not walking down that road. They're going to take them to the bus stop, or they're going to find something, or a parent or somebody to work with to make sure that their children are properly accompanied. 5-year-olds can make mistakes. They don't have the judgment. They're not as attentive, and that can be the same said for 6-year-olds, and for some kids, 10-year-olds are going to make those kind of mistakes. So it does fall upon the parents and the community to make sure children get to a location safely. If we made it upon the district, it would be quite costly for us to do that across the board. We have cut a lot of cost out of our busing. The previous administration, which we had a lot of financial difficulties. If you've been here 21 years, you remember past referendums and failed referendums, as we tried to find cash to run this district. Well, we made a lot of changes after the previous administration. After the last failed referendum, we took a hard look at what we had to do to try and save money and cut costs. And one of the places where a lot of money was being spent needlessly was on busing. And it just seemed like busing was the gravy train that you could make everybody happy with. They did do a lot of denials of pickups, but grandfathering people in so they wouldn't have to be redistricted back to a school. They'd grandfather people in for forever and just not even consider the cost. All that's been ended. We don't grandfather people in anymore. That's something that this administration has been pretty firm about. When you make changes, we just have to get on with it. And I think it's clear that we've saved a lot of money once we've moved from Dairyland to the current supplier, simply because they're just much more efficient at analyzing the routes. And we've been able to cut a lot of costs there just from that route analysis pattern. If you look at the history of your subdivision, the number of children, the children density is much lower than it was in the past, which in and of itself would be a factor. And we do ask kids to walk quite a distance throughout this community to school under some pretty adverse conditions in the winter. And it's as the crow flies. It's not as far as they walk farther, but the deadline is if you can take a map, and if you can take a string around there, no matter how that kid gets there, if they're within that radius, they can walk as long as there's no major highways for them to pass or something like that, high traffic areas. And we do make a lot of children walk in this district. So I think you can probably sense I'm inclined to, support the motion. I'm also, though, want to state very clearly that I think it's very appropriate for you to be here and express your concerns.
Okay.
And I would expect and hope that more people would care as much as you do to come down and express their community. That's what the policy is about. And that's why we have school boards and committees. You guys can always be angry at us afterwards, but that's just part of being the punching bag when you run for school board, I guess, so. Any other questions? Ms. Madden?
I just want to make a comment. From the Sheriff's Department, nobody knew how to do this anymore since Dave Carpenter left. So this was all new to everybody up there. And this report says that the later morning pickup and the afternoon drop-offs are not present, do not present the same problems. However, one of the children driven to the bus is 5 years old. In this deputy's opinion, it is unreasonable to expect a 5-year-old to walk unescorted that distance. We have kids all over the city doing that. And I think that's a personal observation of his rather than, I mean, I would love to pick up every child too. I drive to Muskego to help my grandson who lives in the country with the bus. And particularly on cold days, I absolutely won't let him stand outside. But I have to drive out there every day, and I do it because of that. So I think that the Sheriff's Department is learning about these two as we're going, and I'm going to support the motion.
Okay, I guess unless anyone else, I guess we've had enough discussion on this. We probably better go ahead and vote. Let's do this as a roll call vote. Darren?
Aye.
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 Aye. 5-0. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for coming tonight. That concludes action item number 1. Next action item is approval of monthly vouchers. Any call-ins tonight, Joe?
None this week.
Okay, do I have a motion on monthly vouchers?
I move for approval.
Second.
Move for approval of Mr. McCaffrey, second Ms. Madden. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? None opposed. Motion passes 5-0. Procurement program. We had a lot of discussion on this last time. I'm sure there's going to be more discussion on it this time, so let's move right into it.
Yeah, as you just mentioned, we discussed this last month, and I brought it last month as a information item or discussion item, I can't remember which. Just kind of go over the basic outline of the program. The packet is a lot of the same information. I thought it was important for you to see the manuals and the forms we'll use to, guide us through implementation and then the administration of the P-card program. The one thing I did add, this is a list at the back of the packet with the colored pages. I got a list from Chase, who's the bank that we would be utilizing the credit card program. And this is through the value group, if you recall, and Waukesha County is really the lead on the value group. But I went through and I highlighted the districts that are using this program in orange. I might have missed one or two. There's kind of inconsistent on whether it's school district of or school district at the end or whatever. But if I eyeballed them all correctly, just in this program, through the value group, there's about $40 million to spend by school districts in the state of Wisconsin using the procurement card process. Waukesha County is the biggest utilizer, that they're highlighted in yellow. I thought important for you to see that. And then the town of Waukesha also utilizes it. Now, obviously, the county and the town of Waukesha are, in terms of scale, are very, very different. And by looking at the amount that the town is utilizing, it might be more of a travel expense type of card, where I think the county, to get to that total, must be using it more as an accounts payable card. I think that's an important distinction. Our initial implementation, at least in my office, will be more of an accounts payable approach to the cards, with a few. eAchieve is a perfect example of one where a transportation type of card, when they're traveling the state to arrange testing and everything with students, the card will be used a little differently. So, and then the policy committee is bringing to the board the board policy that goes along with this. So that'll be two conversations coming together for approval. So if I can answer any other questions. There is another, one thing I forgot to mention. This is through the value group. My state, Joe's a member too, the school business officials has a P-card program. It's one of them we looked at. I don't think it's quite as, it's not as nice as the one that Chase offers. And I know there's 90 other school districts in that program utilizing, so it's not a new approach for schools, certainly, a new conversation. So if we can answer any questions related to implementation or anything of that nature, I'd be happy to respond.
Mr. Como?
So if we did pass this evening and it passed at the full board, when would we get going on it?
Probably January. And what I picture is using eAchieve and the departments within this building for a few months for us to work out the inner workings and what's the best approach on the business office side of it, the accounts payable processing side of it. I know some people, words out that we're discussing this. I think there's some people in the district that picture every teacher having a card. I do not see that ever being anywhere near the case. I think each principal might have a card, and maybe the ADs at the high school or something like that. Much smaller scale than I think a lot of people are hoping for, because you do have to administer this thing. You have to, you're putting a lot of trust in your employees, and you need to have a structure that you can have accountability in. So,
But we're first talking about a pilot.
Yes.
And you're saying eAchieve, a couple of the departments in Lindholm. How long do you think you'll run the pilot for?
I think close to the end of the school year.
Okay,
Get
so
to
6
April, see
6
where we're at.
months,
Yeah,
half
4
a
or
year
5.
roughly.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of evaluate at that time if it makes sense to expand it.
Correct.
To change, maybe eAchieve isn't a right fit. So what I hear, Darren, is that you're trying to get right fits for between the people who potentially would use it and how it would be efficient for us here.
Correct.
So as part of, so let's say you get through that pilot, then what would be your next step?
The next step would be probably rolling it out to some at the service building, our maintenance guys who, more than likely, if it's like my similar district, are already utilizing credit cards at Home Depot and the like. And then probably a few schools to see how they want to have us process their card, how they want to handle purchase orders and not, and helping them through that decision-making. Do I use the P card or do I use the standard PO process? But I would picture by the end of 2016 having it be close to where I picture it being. Card at every site. Again, you might have one for the ADs at the high school. Also, some in the maintenance department, but then that's kind of where I see us being. That's my goal, to have that size of.
Well, I like the phased approach. Walk a little bit, test it out, see what that looks like, what that feels like, and then you have in mind, if that's successful, who those next, who would be potentially other users. And what I hear you saying is you're very open to feedback, you're open to just trying this out, seeing how it goes. There is no set deadline that you have to have this in place at this particular time. And that was good to hear, that you're flexible and let's just see how it works and continue to evaluate it. You'd probably come back to this committee every once in a while with an update on it?
Yeah, we could come back maybe in summer when it's a little quieter and say, this is where we are in terms of spend and this is how it's going, here are the things we've had to work through. I can tell you when because I implemented this in Mugwanago, when you first issue those cards and you're dealing with the merchant codes and the controls you have with it, there's a learning curve with that. Some stores that you wouldn't think wouldn't be part of a code that would not work, we're gonna have that. I know, I can, sure as I'm sitting here, Dr. Gray's gonna call me at some point and say, I'm at wherever, and the cards, so there's a learning curve with that.
So our vendors need to also accept this as part of how they
Absolutely.
accept this transaction happening.
In
So-
terms of the accounts payable type of card, a lot of vendors don't want to take on the credit card fee. And I understand that as a business owner, why you wouldn't want to take on that fee. But we have to work our way through and identify those vendors versus ones that already have a willingness to take on and would prefer a payment of that nature. So there's a lot of work in implementing this. It isn't something you just hand cards out to everyone and it magically works effectively.
Fair enough, thank you.
Mr. Edlin?
Did we get any feedback from our auditor on internal controls?
We have reached out to the auditor. They do work with districts who have P-card programs. In terms of internal auditing, the discussion I had with my previous auditor in Mugwanago, so I don't want to make it sound like it was with the auditor here, is though it seems it's a lot different, the systems are very similar as opposed to the standard employee expense report. You attach receipts to it, you sign it, you list all your expenditures. One of the documents in this packet is a transaction log that employees would be asked to fill out, attach their receipts, and then submit it to the business office with payment. So that process is very similar. The approval process of those expenses are the same. If Joe goes somewhere, he would attach receipts to a transaction log. I sign off on it. Dr. Gray would sign off on mine, and I would sign off on his. So there's always that cross-check as you have now. The only difference is the initial transaction is incurred via a card rather than cash or a personal credit card.
Okay. Would they be doing any random checks, spot checks, doing an audit process?
Yeah, I mean, they do sampling now. That type of sampling would occur if that check is triggered as one that they have us pull. We also have an accountant in our office who was in Madison previously, and one of her jobs was going out to the sites. They did it a little differently, where the records were kept at the school. I'm not in favor of that style, but she would go out and audit the P-card like they do a student activity account. So all those protections, again, are in a lot of ways, very similar to what we're doing already.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. McCaffrey?
I think that the most important thing is there's a protection when you put that card out and somebody grabs it and swipes it, right? It can be denied at the terminal,
Correct.
depending on dealer code or even name of business.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the ones that I'm familiar with, if there's a bar or tavern in the name of the business, it's instantaneously denied.
Yeah.
So I have a little bit of experience.
Tried to use one yourself there, huh?
You gotta try. So I think that you have that little extra protection on the swipe, because on just a regular card without that, it may make it through.
Yeah,
We've all heard the horror stories about people going crazy with the credit cards.
mm-hmm.
But you have a little bit extra protection at the machine with the P card.
Yeah, and that's the distinction between district credit cards and the P card is you do have those administrative tools. The other things you have as safeguards, besides the merchant codes, is you can put my card could be different than Joe's and different than the other Joe's card. You can have daily limits, you can have monthly credit limits. There's a lot of things, and part of that implementation and why it'll take us into January, maybe early February to fully implement and get this started, is defining those different categories of cards and what the limits should be and what the merchant codes should be. But you're right, I'm sure you've gone to a store where you wouldn't think would be turned down in a million years, and
Yeah.
that swipe just isn't allowed. So it's pretty effective
Yep.
that way. And then the card itself comes with fraud protection, just like your personal credit cards do as well. So there's an added layer of protection there as well, so.
In the policy that's proposed, is there a writer in there about disciplinary action for, I mean, it'd be like normal theft from the district, but, I mean, is there something in that particular thing where,
No personal use.
well, not so much no personal use, but what would be the remedy if it was used for personal expenses or things like that?
Yeah, the board policy doesn't speak to that, refers to the manual. But how you would handle that is it is theft, and law enforcement could be brought into that conversation. But then also it's a disciplinary action, just like stealing a piece of equipment from a school or anything of that nature.
I just think it should be in the policy specifically relative to the.
The board
PR.
policy?
Yeah, that, discipline could include up to termination, or could include, how would you say it, taking from the paycheck to
Yeah.
recover the cost.
Garnishment.
Garnishment of wages to recover costs. So I think that should be in the policy, just so that it's there. I mean, we hope it doesn't happen, obviously. I think
Right.
with the way we're gonna manage the program, it shouldn't happen if we're restricting it to a certain set of administrators and not doing it on a broad-based employee basis. But anything can happen, you know how it goes.
No,
Yeah, and,
it's the nature of it.
and it doesn't matter whether it's a procurement card or a credit card or just general funds, We've had instances in other districts where people have did inappropriate things with general funds, so I don't think this is any different. But it'd be nice to have in the policy, just so it's clear to employees how important it is to the board that these things are used properly and accounted for properly.
Okay.
And then it's clear in the, if they don't want to use a procurement card, I guess that's an option. It might be kind of messy if you have an athletic director that doesn't want to use a P card, because I'm sure they're going to be very convenient for, let's say if you have a trip taken, you could put the hotel room on the card.
Exactly.
And all the expenses could be handled by someone's personal card. That way you kind of segregate the room charge itself from, room charges and all those other things that they would classify as maybe personal expenses. So that's where you would get kind of a blanket. Let's say if I had to have a block of 5 rooms for 5 days, that could be most of the bill's gonna be in the room bill, really, not in the food bill. Same way for travel expenses, car rentals, things like that. You could put those on P cards probably early on. It's just like having a general corporate card, really, assigned to specific administrators that would be doing those tasks.
Yeah, the reason I spoke to athletic directors specifically, state competitions is a perfect example. You don't know you're going to state until you're going to state. So our process doesn't lend itself to, well, we need to be there in 2 days. We need to make hotel reservations now. That's a perfect example of where this will really be very handy in our daily operation.
Right, and as an employee, it's no fun putting that on your personal credit card and trying to, get recovery from the district and then pay your credit card bill, which could be quite sizable if it's a personal
yeah.
credit card. And so it's just easier for everybody involved to put it on a card like this. Mr. Edlin?
I kind of like the idea of having the P card personally versus using your own personal credit card for this reason. When you use your own personal credit card, you're saying it's my money, I'm spending it. And then you're going to the district and you're saying, give me my money. In this case, you're using a card that is a government-issued card. And when you're using that government-issued card, you better not misuse it. So there's that extra, I think, little sense of acknowledgement that the money really isn't mine. And you have to be a little bit more concerned about how you're spending it.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Are we anticipating that if you have the P card, you're using it in lieu of your personal card? How does that,
I'm
how would,
anticipating
You're
that.
anticipating.
I'm not mandating that.
I'm just thinking about the rebates. We don't get a rebate off a personal card, correct? Even though we're reimbursing the employee for.
No.
And that's one of the nice things about the P card is the rebate.
And I think the convenience of it is gonna, when people are making that decision, I think
Right.
will draw them to the P card, is the ease of it. You don't have to come back and
Yeah, right, and submit, yeah.
hope you get
And hope you
reimbursed
get your
before you get
check.
your bill and all those other things.
Mr. Como?
You know, I think that's part of the evaluation, you know, as we run the pilot. And if people don't, if you're finding, you're issuing the cards and people aren't using it and they're still turning in expenses with their personal credit cards, I think we have to ask why. Why are you doing that? What's going on there? And that's where I like your approach, Junior. Let's analyze it, let's pilot it, let's kind of just take it one step at a time. And I think it'd be ridiculous if we're not getting that volume that we think. I mean, because it does take effort for you and put the policy, you know, we have put the policy in place, put all the procedures in place, and then if we're not getting the kickback of the, what was it, 1.79%?
Yeah.
What are we doing it for? So I kind of see where you're heading, Mr. McCaffrey. You know, are we gonna it's not necessarily gonna be mandated, but we gotta get a certain level of use to still be utilizing it.
And I think that's an analysis more for the, kind of the traveling card, the accounts payable card in my office to pay vendors. We'll utilize that because that rebate, it's there, and it's really just like writing the check. I mean, it's.
Sure.
So those, that I know will get the utilization
Okay.
on. The other, the individual cards, that'll be interesting to see how it plays.
Mr. Evelyn?
I like Mr. McCaffrey's, where he's going with that too, and here's why. If I'm somebody who's gonna take a whole group and we're gonna be out of state or whatever, going to state, and all of a sudden we realize that, and I have two cards in my hand, either one of them I'm gonna have to fill out a voucher report for. Okay, either one of them is gonna be just as much paperwork as the other one. But the difference is, if I use my card, my personal card, I'm gonna get cash back.
Or miles.
Exactly. So I have no incentive to use this other card. And I think we ought to take a really close look at the dollar amounts that will reimburse on a personal credit card if someone is issued a P card. Because you should be using that thing.
We had that I mean, people figure these things out, it doesn't take, how I addressed that in McGuanago was that, and I forget the dollar amount, but if it was $1,000, I don't remember, but say it was $1,000, I told them that any reimbursement over $1,000 would be part of a 45-day administrative review.
Yeah.
So they'd get their bill.
Yeah.
They'd have no reimbursement. That took care of that pretty rapidly. Because they don't want to miss the timing of.
Yeah, because you're gonna hit a cycle.
Right.
You're gonna get a cycle in 45 days no matter what.
Yeah, so
They don't
there's
wanna
ways
play
of targeting it, but that is something you want to evaluate, because with the rebate coming to us now, you're really taking money truly from the district now. It's not a convenience thing, it's not, but that's a pretty easy thing to correct.
Okay. Something to monitor. Maybe come back in the future and report.
So when I look at this, we keep talking about a pilot program. Are you asking us to give approval for the program or approval for a pilot program?
I'm asking for approval of the program. And that's how I anticipate rolling it out, is in stages.
Okay. Any further questions? Does anyone have a motion?
I have a motion.
Ms. Madden?
I'll move for approval of the implementation of a procurement card program through value.
Have a
Second.
Second, Mr. McCaffrey. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? None opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Fourth item, approval of quick claim deed to the city of Waukesha.
I think I finally got up to speed on what this was.
I like giving anything to the city of Waukesha.
So,
Here in the town.
It was hard to give him this piece of land.
about,
Had a lot of discussion
I
on it.
think my first week here, I got an email from the city's attorney related to the 5 acres that we sold the city out on Oakdale, or Gigax, I don't know what name it goes by these days, but at first I thought it was related to access on Parkton Drive, but it really is the opposite corner in a small walkway that originally we had an easement on as part of the development of the property. And this was close to coming to you in summer, but then they got to the point where they weren't sure who owned that walkway, and that's what's delayed it from May or June to now. So now what the city is asking us to do is to release the district's easement to the property. So I brought it as, I put it as action. At first, I thought you'd be very familiar with it, because in reading the board minutes from when the sale, it talked about easements, but again, that was, I think, the access from the other corner, so I thought, well, certainly it's an action item, they'll have the background. As I dug a little more, I left it on as an action item, if you're comfortable in doing that. But this isn't a super time-sensitive request, I don't believe. I don't know what the urgency would be, so I bring it for you, forward just to kind of give you the information and look for guidance on how, if it's as simple as, yeah, we have no real purpose for this easement, let's move ahead, that's great, and if it's, you want more information related, I can certainly answer any, or get answers to any questions you have.
I don't see a reason to delay myself, but go ahead, Mr. Como.
Yeah, we've had a number of quit claim deeds that we've done with the city over the last 14 years or so. They kind of ran in streaks. We were kind of cleaning some things up. And we had a streak of, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 of them. Just, cleanup of just like this. This is a cleanup item, essentially, that was brought about when they actually were trying to figure out who owned what when they went to the title company. And I don't see any problem with this. I think that we have a great relationship with the city. We've had these quitclaim deeds go in both directions. I think we've had some too over time. And, I don't know why we wouldn't want to move forward with this. Dealing with it at the opposite end, originally where Parkton is, I remember some discussion there. And actually that easement then would continue right along. I mean, that whole, I think that's like a north, it's like a northwest sort of direction. It's going northwest. And I think we were at that time even fine with that discussion. So this is even smaller and more straightforward. So I think this would be something that I would be in favor of moving forward with.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Are they still planning access off the Parkton? Because I know that was a huge discussion that we had.
It's there.
Yeah, but are they still planning to have access off it?
Yeah, but the access is there.
Well, they were gonna improve. It's there? It's done, the parking lot's in and the whole shot that they said we were gonna do? Okay. I just wondered.
It's not a parking lot, but there's a walkway right off Parkton. I mean,
Yeah.
you really don't even need,
Concern was parking on the road,
yeah,
and they were gonna put in a parking lot.
yeah, well, if
So-
they're gonna put in a parking lot, it would have to come off of this easement because
It was gonna, yeah, be part
because
of the
there's no
park.
place to put a parking lot over or off of the Parkton side. But for them to they got a big paved walkway around the entire property.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been up there. I was just
You haven't
wondering.
been up there?
I
There's
have
a
not
place
been up
set right next to Parkton. That's where the playground is.
Yep.
And I assume they're gonna put like they do in the county parks, like a little place where you can have barbecue.
Yeah, a shelter or something.
Yeah, shelter there.
Okay.
That's a nice piece of property. I mean,
Yeah.
I hope we asked a lot of money for it. I doubt if we did. Yeah. But anyway, the quitclaim deed
They're
is,
paid fairly.
We were fairly compensated for the
Yep.
property.
Yeah.
That's-
yeah, it's a nice piece of property.
It was a fair transaction.
Hopefully it didn't compromise what we may or may not use the remainder of the property for.
Right.
Okay, do I have a motion on the quitclaim deed?
I'll make a motion. Motion to approve the quitclaim deed by the city of Waukesha for the 15-foot wide pedestrian easement held by the district but owned by the developer. I don't know what the subdivision is called, for the record.
Is it River
Maybe River Bluff? No.
River Hills Estates.
Hills Estates?
Yeah, River Hills Estates. was-
River Hills Estate.
Yeah.
So be it.
Second?
Just to clarify, the quitclaim deed is not by the city of Waukesha, it's by the school district of Waukesha.
for the city of Waukesha.
For the city.
Correct. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Won't have to do that one again. Yeah. Information items, monthly budget updates.
For, in your packet is the budget update for the month of November. We continue to operate in accordance with our operating budget and with last year. Just briefly going through the report, in page 1 just lists the local sources. We're consistent with where we were last year at this time. Obviously, we were going to get our property tax in January, but the majority of the information from local sources is, the student fees and the material fees and admission fees, and it's consistent where we've been in the previous year. Going to the second page of the report, we received our SAGE and our title grants in November, and then we did have, the only one that really provides some initial explanation is in source 861 on the second page. We had 103,000 in equipment sales, and what that was, it was a reclassification from a credit, from an expense line item. We had sold some equipment, some iPad 2s that were previous to the Waukesha 1 initiative, and they're just being reclassified to a revenue source instead of being credited to an expense line item. So year-to-date, we're at 6.6% compared to 8.13% last year in revenues. The only real difference is in source code 878 in capital leases last year when we booked the revenue for the receipt of the equipment leases for the Apple lease. But otherwise, we're consistent with where we were last year at this time and in accordance with our budget. Going to page 3, we're right in line on our salaries and our wages on a percentage basis of budget from last year. And if you look at the last page of the report, it details out our health claims payable. And as you can see in the last page of the report, our health claims payable, the balance, we're continuing to have a good year. Our health claims payable is consistent with where we were at this year, last year. And we'll evaluate that at the end of the year and see where we are in accordance with IBNR, the incurred but not reported, to see if there's any adjustment that needs to be made to that line item. Going into page 4, we're looking at our purchase services. In line item, in object 336 in our electric, it's for the month, it's just due to a timing difference. I know why the variance is what it is between the months. And the same thing with our pupil travel year-to-date. We just did not receive last year our invoices for the month of October when we did receive them in the November financial statement. So purchase services are in accordance with budget. And going to page 5 of the financial statement, you did see in object 551 where we do have a credit. The credit was taken away from the equipment purchase line item, so we had a $45,000 debit, but year-to-date, everything is in line. We were just reclassifying that to a revenue account. So year-to-date in capital or overall budget, the district spent $37.2 million or 25.89% compared to $38.3 million or 27.21%. And really the only difference is from last year, year-to-date, is in July 2014, there was a $2.5 million entry for the equipment purchase additions, which is offset by the revenue source code. In Fund 27, Special Education Fund, we received our handicapped aid of $909,000 and $525,000 in federal aid. And overall, in the Special Education Fund, we're in accordance with our budget and where we were at last year at this time. And that concludes the report. Any questions from Mr. Como?
Yeah, just real quick, Joe, we were able to sell the old iPads, some of the old iPads.
Yes.
And it was roughly 104,000, not quite, just shy of that. Do you remember how many, roughly?
Well, what they were is, they were before the Waukesha One initiative. They were iPads that were no longer being used. And the value of those iPads, due to the new technology coming on the market, the value of those iPad 2s were really decreasing, but I don't know the exact number. But it was in order to get some revenue instead of just not getting any revenue at all. It was just the value of those.
I'm actually surprised,
Yeah.
actually, at some of the age of some of those that we were able to get something for it. So I thought when I saw 104,000, I thought that was pretty good. And that's why I was just wondering on the quantity there, but, I mean.
It's just
s-
a cleanup from the various sites throughout the district.
Yeah, I think the age of those are, some of those are 4 and 5 years old, and,
I think some of them were from the pilot program
yeah,
at West. as
over at
well.
West, yeah, that was the initial,
Individual buys that were.
yeah.
as well.
So I was just happy to see actually any revenues, to tell you the truth, so. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Mr. Edlin?
What's the procedure for disposing of them? I mean, how do we let people know they're for sale? If you want to bid on it, here's the price or whatever. How do we go about?
Well, there's various small pieces of equipment, in the technology department supervisors that procedure. They take the whole big list of assets that they have, and then they try to, obviously, you're gonna get more if you do everything in bulk than you would do it individually. And then they would go to best price they could get for that bulk purchase.
Mr. Coleman?
I thought there's a system that we go through for that, right? There is a, I thought for other computer technologies, there's a system that we can post and say, hey, we have this equipment available.
Steve does have a system where he does post that.
Yeah.
Yes, and so does Glenn. Glenn does that same
It's not
thing.
Craigslist, but it's, you know, it's a,
Or-
yeah, it's a smaller audience, and I don't remember what it's called, but there is a particular system that we utilize there.
And there are opportunities for people that, the students, if they want to purchase their iPad when they're done with the district, you know, they're also able to do that.
More buyers, the better, the price is higher. Mr. Edlin?
Well, that's kind of where I was going with this. I understand wanting to get rid of them all at one time. If you have a bulk purchaser who wants to take them all, you know, that's great. But, you know, I tend to want to also allow the community to have the opportunity to purchase them, particularly the students, because they're familiar with the
Yeah,
devices.
They do have that program in place for
Right.
students and for retiring teachers.
Okay, but the rest of the community, I mean, should the district consider having a website to?
There was a time where we would post stuff on our website of items that were for sale. I don't know, do we still do that?
Yeah, Steve does, I don't know all his particulars, but he does have a website where he lists things for sale for the district for his technology items.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's in our best interest to get the best price, and, you know, if somebody in the community can't afford a brand-new iPad and, you know, they're looking to get one for their
The
kid
issue
or
with the
somebody
twos,
else.
though, the issue with some of this stuff is it can't be updated, Steve. You can't go to the new iOS, and a lot of the apps don't work on the old,
Okay,
which is why
Yeah.
we tend to not use them in a district. I mean, the life expectancy of these are basically done. You can't update them, and you can't use, I mean, some apps you can't even use with a iOS before this.
happy with anything.
Yeah, that's why we're happy with the 140. But yeah, I mean, the useful life of it for anything technology related where you would actually be doing any work on them is essentially done. Most of the apps won't even work on these.
I got an iPad 1 and I just love the thing.
Try to download the ABC app, the new ABC app, but it's not gonna work for you. You're gonna get an error.
Some people, you know, if you're somebody who's not gonna get a lot of apps.
Right,
senior-
somebody could use it, yeah,
Senior
somebody could use
citizen
it
who
for-
just wants to hop on the internet, you know what I mean?
Right.
Get emails.
Yeah.
It can be a very,
Yeah.
you know, great little investment for somebody who's, you know, has the opportunity to be able to purchase it.
Right, yeah, and I mean, they did list stuff,
Okay,
I know, on our website, on the district's website for quite a while. I would check often to see what was listed.
thank you.
Same time, there's an administrative problem. You know, there's a transaction cost. If you can get a student to fork over $50, and it's pretty much a fast transaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if you go through the whole community route, it can get kind of messy, you know. Some senior citizen might expect it to be free or want to bargain for it or, you know, see, and so I I don't think it's easy to just generally kick it out to the public. Students first, retirees, staff, but as you say, the reason we're getting rid of them is they're not really useful to us, and they're only gonna be useful to a small segment, so. Okay, any other comments on the monthly budget update? Okay, next information item is the enrollment projection.
Yeah, when I started here in October, a demographic study had already been completed, but there was no enrollment projection part of it. And I know one of the desires of this committee and the board is to start doing some long-term budget forecasting, and obviously we have the driver of that's resident enrollment, or enrollment in general, be open enrollment or whatever. So, but I thought it fit in well with the demographic study. My goal is to present budget projections in February to this committee, so we need this foundational type of information. I thought we'd go over, and then when we get to that budget projection conversation in February, you'll be able to have some information to understand some of the theories and some of the reasons behind wherever we end up looking. So what I attached here is a 10-year budget, or I'm sorry, enrollment projection. The company that does this for us uses 4 different approaches, mathematical approaches, to come up with enrollment projections. Each one of them shows us steadily declining over the next decade. Some of them more severely than others. But what I'll take from this, and what Joe and I will use in our budget projections, is come up with a kind of median trend line for enrollment, and use that in the revenue limit going forward. And then this enrollment projection process is something that the district probably should look at doing every 2 to 3 years, just to keep that data fresh as we move forward. So all I grabbed was the kind of the summary pages, the conclusion of the study, and then the chart that shows the 4 different approaches to our enrollment. But again, they're all showing steady decline. That's not unique in southeastern Wisconsin. It's not unique in most districts in the state. Declining enrollment is something that's out there as an issue, and it really comes down to birth rate being lower. If you had to say one issue that's driving that, is the birth rate in Waukesha County, for example, has been steadily decreasing for years as well. So, and then the last page, the back page of the executive summary, is the demographic study. And again, I have all the studies that we're going to discuss tonight here, but I thought, how do you summarize all of this so a board member can take away something without making this their full-time job? So what I did is I grabbed the map that shows anticipated new housing starts between 2016 and 2025. That's the same time period as the enrollment study. Growth in terms of property growth, building, will continue to be to the south and to the west for the most part. I don't think that's probably a surprise to anyone who's familiar with our community. So we're going to continue to have housing starts, but our enrollment's also going to be declining during that period of time. So what you're going to see in the district itself is a transition of where the kids are located, more than likely, more to the south and probably more to the west in theory. Again, I don't know the types of houses that are being built. I would love to see them all be 3-bedroom ranches and 3-4 kids in every one of them, but it probably aren't going to be all those. So I tried to encapsulate all that information into a nice, quick summary for you and give you, again, some guideline that we'll be worried about and thinking about as we're laying out some financial projections in the months ahead. If there's anything else you have a question on, or maybe we can pull from the study and get a response to you, I'd be more than happy to do that as well.
Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, Darren, I really appreciate the enrollment numbers in the map. The map is really, I garnered a lot of information from that. One of the things I find fascinating, we've looked at, we went as far back as the mid-'70s at one time. This is a study done a while ago, information shared with us. And it seems like the cyclical number has been like 1,000 student influx or deflux. It stays between that 1,000, going up and down over the course over decades. So this isn't like any brand new, the cycle isn't brand new. It's gone up, it's gone down, but it stayed, what I found fascinating is it stays, and this data even shows it stays roughly between 1,000, it's 1,000 students that you're looking at for an up and down in the cycle here. So I found that fascinating, so that the future enrollment data that you pulled together using different sources than when I was first on the board, when we were presented this information, still corresponds pretty much the same within that cycle. So that was fascinating. I mean, I think we've known for a while that our schools aren't necessarily located in the best spots, right? So, I mean, as the city has grown, it's grown out from the center, out this way. So, south and west is no surprise to us. That's where most of the land that's available is located. So that wasn't really a surprise. Where you're looking at significant growth, you were talking about 251 housing units or greater in those dark red areas, right? There still are some other growth areas, though, in other parts of the city that I thought were interesting, indicated by the little man running. And some of them were actually still in some areas that maybe aren't quite as saturated as we might have thought. So I found this to be very, very helpful. And I found it fascinating that we're in that 1,000-student cycle over decades that kind of go up and down. So thank you for doing this. This is good timing with the next item that comes up. Absolutely.
Mr. Edlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is very interesting. Did you put this map together?
No, that was part of the study.
Part of the study? The most controversial part on this entire map is the part that is central and north, that is the light red color, because that's Moore Downs Golf Course. I'd like to know where they got that information from.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Not controversial to me, because I'm not the one making the decision on Moore Downs Golf Course. Although I like Moore Downs Golf Course, I don't say so.
Are you in support of keeping Moore Downs?
The one other thing that this map includes that I thought was a good reference, those blue areas that are, there's 4 of them, are the district's property holdings. I thought that was a good add to this map to give you a quick reference to where we're placed in terms of potential growth or not.
Are you sure about that, though, Steve? Isn't Moore Downs the plot to the left of that area?
No, Moreland Boulevard is where the county buildings are.
Yeah, almost to F.
Hmm?
Yeah, that's the county property.
Yeah.
Because that seems to me,
And the street that's going, it's a dotted line going north, it's kind of broken line. I believe that's Delafield.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
it's-
164 on
you're
that
right.
map is Pewaukee Road.
You're right, I think you're right on that. Yeah.
Right out of town, that's Pewaukee Road. And F is St. Paul.
I think the problem with a map like this is it doesn't take into account what one would expect for redevelopment
Well,
within the community. Like, there will be redevelopment within the city over time. And that will change the makeup of the houses.
yeah,
I'm not a big fan of urban sprawl myself, I prefer to see the city be the core of where people reside. And so, what they're just saying, there's open space, and if you build out those open spaces, that's where the people are gonna be. Well, the idea is, I think communities are gonna see more core development within the communities. It seems to make more sense than what so-called urban sprawl. I mean, we had a little bit of it tonight, I mean, to be honest with you, it's, you have a subdivision out there that you have to service with a bus and, you know, one door-to-door service and all that, whereas if they were in the city, it would be easy for them to utilize the sidewalks and all the services the city provides. They're out there because taxes are low and it gives them a rural lifestyle that they're comfortable with. And that's why they're out there. But that doesn't mean that concentration that I see in, let's say, Section M, where there's wetlands, I suppose, out there, and there's a lot of stuff out there that I just don't
Non-buildable land.
I just don't see a lot of that being built on it either,
Right.
so. Mr. Como?
So Darren, is our, one of the conclusions of the enrollment report is the next few years, roughly 3 years, they believe the accuracy is very high, and over time, you know, they're just kind of qualifying, you know, saying, over time, the accuracy of this may go down, just like anything else. It's harder to project further out, right? You just don't know who's gonna move in and what lands will become for sale, you know, for sale, so on and so forth, who's gonna buy what. Do we plan on updating this every few years? Do you see that as being part of our regular budgeting process?
I would
Getting
say
this
no
input?
later than every 3 years, you should be running a new enrollment projection. Demographic study, I'm not sure if that is as timely or as urgent, but that enrollment study, you definitely want to be able to reference fresh data. And then the reason is the benefit of those next few years, those kids have already been born.
Right, right.
You have a set data point to measure from. You get out 4 or 5 years, you know, who knows, you know, where those kids will be or what the birth rate will be 5 years from now. But definitely for budget projections, I would want at least, especially if we're finding the data, if you're finding the data fairly accurate, I think you can go that 3rd year. But after that point, I think you really need to,
Kind of drops off.
yeah,
Yeah.
at that point, it's worth redoing the study.
Okay.
If you look at this map also, there's not a lot of houses in there. If you look, I mean, Section M is a big area and 250 houses, so it's they're expecting it to be, whatever's built out there not to be that much. S is actually a little bit more compact. So it doesn't look like they're projecting a lot of building. If you look at this, when you look at the number of units versus the size of the area, so I don't think we can count on a lot of new building enrollment going forward, so. Especially when it's only one kid a house, maybe. One kid every 3 houses.
I've always told my boards, count swing sets, not houses.
Yeah,
That's a better measure.
a lot of them are empty now. Mr. Edlin?
So what is the designation for, I'm probably missing it, but the P and the Q and the, you know, the letter designation for each quadrant on this?
How did they come up with those?
What does that represent?
I think it's just, it must be how they pull the data. It's nothing we provided them. I think they just wanted to break it into some,
Just a way to aggregate it.
you know, to show you, be able to break it down somewhat, so they came up with their own. And I assumed it was part of data pulls that they were able to, that they use on their end.
Okay. I don't know, you know, if they customize things like this for the individual customer, but something like this is not as helpful to me, is if I see the boundaries of an elementary school in a particular growth area, so that I can kind of guesstimate which way the growth patterns in relationship to that school is. You know, that way you're going to be able to project, you know, where you're going to have the greatest need for busing, for, you know, for filling up the school, if you need to change boundaries, that sort of thing.
Yeah, they have the ability to provide that data. It's another step in the proposal. It's a lot more time-consuming to calculate, so this was the study that was here when I got here. If we wanted to get to that point, if we started discussing boundaries and those, they can provide a attendance area breakdown, when and if we feel the need to have that information.
Okay.
Technically, we don't have any real capacity problems. I mean, you know, because of declining enrollment, we have a little room in West, and, you know, if you look at that area, it's west. We have a little room in north, you know, so all the way across the board, it's not like we're under threat here. And when it comes to elementary school locations, it's always been a problem that Prairie and West are the two main schools that service everything from the south into that southwest corner. And so they've been kind of crowded over the years. And
In Meadowbrook.
Meadowbrook is actually, they've had some declines here recently. If you look at the numbers, they're not where they were. And
Okay.
so that's, you know, recently that hasn't been a crowded school like it was at one time.
Right.
I think it's maybe part of that is some of you as programs have been, you know, come up, but also it's just the maturing of the subdivision means fewer and fewer kids as the subdivisions mature. They were all many subdivisions out there at one time. Okay,
And we have the factor of choice, right? So we have people choosing, as long as we have choice within our district, there's an unpredictability to that portion also. So, and actually choice has made it kind of interesting, I think. I think it's been good that we've offered choice. I think we can continue to offer choice. I think that's what our parents want within the district. It makes our job a little bit more difficult, but I think we've been able to accommodate most people's requests. Not all of them, but most.
And that's one of the reasons, Dr. Gray and I talked about doing that attendance area breakdown. The thing with choice is it makes it hard to, you know, those kids aren't tied to that attendance area, which I think is a good thing overall. It just makes hard to project where parents are gonna, you know, they're voting with their feet every year, so it's hard to, how do you anticipate what that's gonna be?
Mr. Edlin?
One more question was, do you have any idea what the numbers? Oh, I see it. It's based on color, projected housing units. The two numbers that are on each one. Very good, thank you.
Okay, I think that covers a brief introduction to long-term population trends and possibly enrollment trends relative to that. Doesn't look like we can count on a great deal of new housing developments leading to more enrollment, from what I can gather from that. Okay, if we're done, we can move right on to the facility studies report, because I'm sure that's going to be an interesting topic, and Mr. Norder's been waiting here patiently
Yeah.
for us to move on to that topic. And the only problem I had, by the way, the problem I had looking at the report is I had a hard time reading that Grace print and knowing which school I was looking at times. And so that was the
Or
only,
at the top of the page.
yeah,
Yeah, the reversal there.
yeah.
Oh,
That made it a little
That's-
hard.
Yeah, this,
yeah.
yeah, right up here is, that was hard.
So, this facilities study, I think, goes back to conversations that probably started about a year ago from what I've been able to gather. So again, we struggled with, you know, here's my copy of the facility study. I'm more than willing to share an electronic copy of this with anyone who would like one, but I thought I'd start with the executive summaries from, or executive summary from the study itself, and then the costing and kind of a breakdown by school. I just kind of, Glenn and I generated a few broad categories of areas where we thought would kind of frame our conversation a little better tonight and go forward. So if, Glenn, you want to talk about the 5 areas or 4 areas that we kind of identified as, it kind of follows the format of the study of areas of conversation.
So what we did was we broke it out into site safety and common areas, ADA compliant, improvements, interior, exterior, mechanical HVAC, and then specialty areas. And then we went through and calculated what we thought would be the cost to do the projects in those areas that were brought forth as recommendations.
This right now, right, Glenn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of in the middle of the packet, this spreadsheet here with cost by school and then by category.
So what we did is we went through the Epstein-Ewing study and went through their recommendations of things that they said we should take a look at doing. And then we put costs to them in those areas. And that's how we came up with the cost estimates for each building. So, like Darren said, if you got some time on your hand and want to go through that study, we'll gladly provide it for you. But it's pretty well done, the way Darren put it together of what our needs are per school. And you just kind of take a look at it from there.
Yeah, and in some of these things, this is an analysis, especially when you get into ADA, of things you can do. A lot of our buildings, obviously, I think is grandfathered the right term, are grandfathered. So you as a board really have full discretion when it comes to those types of topics, but they're included in the study because that's the set of glasses that the architectural firm looked through. It was, how do you become fully ADA compliant? Obviously, with the age of our buildings, that's, some of our buildings, it's a bigger issue at some than others. But the other thing that I've added that wasn't part of the initial costing is I added a 10% contingency. Again, with the age of, if you've ever done a home improvement plan in your own house, you're gonna have surprises. You start digging into walls, those types of things. So a 10% contingency is included in the costing. What's not included in the costing is the cost of doing nothing. That's the inflationary impact of waiting. We did not determine a factor to include in the costing for that at all. So, so if there's, you know, it's a lot of information, but it's also how do you start talking about it? What specific questions can we answer? So hopefully this is a good starting point going forward.
Another area that is in here is site security, creating secured entranceways for our buildings. And it's actually a pretty substantial number. I had the opportunity to visit all of our schools with Darren and Joe last week, so we could take a good look at what we could do in that area. So that number is in here too, to give you kind of an idea of under, you know, site safety and things like that.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for taking the 4 inches of information and trying to summarize it, you guys. When Dr. Gray first showed me that, I opened it up. This is a year or whatever ago, and I'm looking at it, I'm going, I don't know what board member's gonna read this, but I'm not gonna read this. There's no way. So I'm glad that you're able to grab your hands. I really do like this spreadsheet. This is fantastic. Just sticking to your point on the safety concerns, obviously, there's been a change in our culture recently that has brought, you know, safety concerns kind of to the forefront. There isn't any one building that's perfect, is really what I take from this. And I actually know, I've been to a few of the buildings this fall, and there are some inadequacies that actually, some of them are pretty not so good. But one thing to take is every single building could use an improvement here. I appreciate you letting us know that the ADA compliance, we're grandfathered in for a lot of that stuff, but that doesn't mean just because we're grandfathered in, and we should not be looking at that. I think that there's some schools that we could take a real hard look at for those particular areas. Contingency, I appreciate. The other thing that I really appreciated was understanding. I really liked on, like the 3rd or 4th page in, where we list all of our buildings and when they were built, and what revisions or when were major additions put on. You can see there was a big push in the 50s and 60s, and even the 70s, really big push in building. Nothing in the 80s, just a couple in the 90s. We've pretty much slowed down. And that goes to my point a little earlier, where we put those buildings are not they were good at the time, but they're not necessarily all the best locations for what we have going on right now, so that leads to some busing costs, right? So with the downward trend of enrollment, We're not gonna be necessarily building new schools. So we'll have to kind of see where additions come in and as a strategy. This is just information, as you guys pointed out. This is not the solution. This is just the information you're getting us. So here's kind of the status of the district. It really isn't the strategy, and it really isn't, what are the solutions to each of the problems. That's what we have to look forward to. But what I like about this is enough information for me to digest on each of the locations. You put in the positive and the negatives, written in a language that I can understand. I don't have to, be a member of the skilled trades and to understand this. So, and you might, on the other hand, Steve, you might want to actually get at some of that detail in there.
My questions.
Holy cow, I mean, when I started reading some of that stuff, that was just too much for me. But overall, this is a good way to bring about the status, so thank you for doing that.
I should say one other thing, with not what's in the study, but what's not in the study. This study does not get into the transition of instructional spaces to 21st century learning, or this is more of a nuts and bolts type of study, not a what should instructional spaces be in 2015 or 2020. So those types of things, I just want to make sure we're clear.
Well, that's good
We're
to
not
know.
part of the purview of this study. There's a few things about increasing lines of sight and things like, but not the types of changes we've seen at some of our schools already.
So that's actually good to know, because I thought what you meant by specialty areas might have been that, but that's really not classroom, reconfiguring.
There's some minor
areas
touches
for-
in there, but if I asked
project-based
12
learning, or-
instructional people what that should be, you'd have 12 different visions. How do you cost that?
So if I was to interpret that, if we were to say we really wanted to hit project-based learning, hit that hard across our district, it doesn't really include like some of the renovations that we have at like Saratoga
No.
to facilitate
Is that a
that.
fair statement, Glenn? That
Yeah, here's what was included in that broad brush of specialty areas. It would be restrooms that are brought up to ADA, security or any emergency, gymnasiums, whether it's redoing the gym floors and things like that. And then some of them did have in that specialty area, one thing that was noted in the study was media areas and library areas. For some reason, they picked on those areas in their study as things that they thought we were a little bit behind in as far as our remodeling of our media centers and things like that. So that's what's included when you see that line item, specialty areas. That's what's included in that line item.
Oh, we may be behind, but there might be a lot of other Wisconsin school districts that are even farther behind, so. So that's kind of, we have to measure that all in. Some of that's just, do we really need to do it? I think it's more important to have our windows caulked and all the PM that needs to be done on an ongoing basis. We need to pick up on that and make sure those don't end up on these reports, because there's really no reason that just regular maintenance of windows and doors and stuff like that shouldn't just be something that doesn't show up on these reports. I would think, we just gotta pay for the ongoing work. I was a little bit surprised, and I'm sure Steve is probably have a better feel for this. Whittier has $1 million HVAC problem potential, and West has a $1.5 million HVAC problem potential.
Well,
popping
them are the aging boilers.
Okay.
I think if you remember, when we brought the performance contract to you, we brought it as a $24 million item, and we pared it down to $8 million. A lot of them things would have been included in that $24 million. But as the prioritization went of what needed to be done to pare it down to that $8 million, that's where we came to those numbers. You'll notice there's over $10 million worth of HVAC things that through the Epstein report, we still feel that needs to be done in this district. I think we hit the tip of the iceberg of some of those things through the performance contract.
And I think, getting back to Steve's point, when we go to tackle those things, we'll probably try to avoid doing what we did the last time, which is going out through the energy efficiency program. If we can do it within our own budgetary items, that would probably be our preference. Mr. Edlin?
I kind of question some of the numbers here. I'll start with Whittier, just because I'm familiar with a lot of the stuff at Whittier. But, when we had an estimate to do the boilers at Waukesha South and Les Paul Middle School, we were given an estimate of $1.7 million, and the bids actually came back at, what, 700,000? Because we had the money left over enough to be able to do the field lights at all the high schools.
I do not think it came in that low.
No, the money left over was a contingency dollars. The field lights were budgeted in, but they were gonna be used as contingency dollars if we didn't have.
Yeah,
So we didn't, if we'd ran over budget, we would have pulled that money from the,
Yeah, I remember the bids coming back, at least for South anyway. The bids were, maybe it was just South.
You might be right that South came in at
Yeah.
700,000.
Yeah, and they originally estimated, was it 1.4 or 1.7 million?
1.4, I think, Steve.
Yeah, so they
Yeah,
were.
there
they
was some
just-
savings.
Yeah, I don't know, and I question that to begin with, is where are you getting these numbers from? And, it was double of what we actually ended up getting the bids from the contractors. So when I see Whittier, which is, not nearly the boiler system that there is for a whole high school, and it's $1 million, I'm a little apprehensive at other numbers that are being thrown out here.
Well, it's boilers, it's pumps, it's everything that goes along with that, Steve. And what we did was we sat down and put these numbers together. I used my trades guys to help me out, because unfortunately, that study did not come with a costing on it. So to make it worth your while, we had to try to put a costing on it. Why it was never done without numbers, I can't tell you. So we sat down and we took a look at what we paid at South, and that's how we tried to calculate it out. You may be right. We may be high in some areas, low in some areas.
Yeah, because South was a complete gutting of the boiler room. There was nothing in there. It was empty. So it was all new piping, pumps, boilers, flues, controls. It was a complete new system. So I'm just saying that this number is way out of the ballpark for what we're gonna do for a boiler room.
And we would be doing the same thing at Whittier. I mean, when you take a look at the size of the boilers in Whittier, there's those two huge boilers in there. So if we stay with the same capacity, you're gonna be putting probably one less boiler in Whittier than you would South. Now, of course, once we got that far, that would all be designed, and we could go from there. But we had to start with a budgetary number, and what we did was we tried to use the best budgetary number off of what we had just done to try to come up with those figures.
Yeah, okay. That's the exact reason that when we go to a project like this, I'm not gonna be around, but, again, I'm gonna go back to what I originally said, that I prefer the spec and bid process, so that you hire a consulting engineer. He's gonna tell you the system design, the type of materials, and specify everything, and then you put it out to bid, apples to apples bid. Because, what we've done in the past was not, a very accurate way of coming up with any kind of estimate for a project. So, but I did have some questions, some other questions. I always get concerned when I see these kind of cut and paste statements that are put in reports like this. And that's, many of these reports say natural gas furnaces and condensing units are past their useful life. What does that mean? And who determined that?
Well, the thing about it is the people that put this study together. Now, if you look, we had that conversation. I had that conversation with my 4 HVAC guys. Because our June air furnaces, we don't think they're past their useful life. We think with some new burners and some work in the air handlers, that those things will last us a lot longer. So that's why the number where them are is much lower, because it's to replace the burner and the things that support which would be the fan units and things out in the building. So we took a good look at that and said, no, we don't need to, because if we were to design a brand-new system for those June air systems, that number would be way low. So we had that same mindset as you did, Mr. Etlin, that we don't think some of the stuff that they said has outlived its useful life, has outlived its useful life. So we took that into consideration.
I think it's important that the study's a guide. It's not a mandate that you tackle all of these projects. Actually, the documents that are behind where the costing spreadsheet is Glenn's 5-year plan. Now, it's a much more specific plan. What we did with this, this is a living document that Glenn's probably been doing for several years. But we also provided you the things he has planned out for the next 5 years, and where we copied the pages from the study to say that, we'll use this study as a guide through maintaining our buildings, but we'll also take a realistic approach. Those furnaces are a perfect example. Whenever you have these studies done, they're gonna use useful life for that equipment, because if something goes wrong, and they don't want the district coming back and saying, well, you should have put that in the study because that was well beyond its useful life. It's hard for them to measure preventive maintenance and those types of things. So that's a common flaw, I think, with these studies. So again, that's why it's not this isn't our maintenance plan, it's just a snapshot of where we think we are. Maybe that's why there wasn't numbers in the original study. I can't speak to that, but,
Sure.
So we're just trying to give you some measure of cost, not saying these are urgency, in all cases, urgencies.
Yep, just for the benefit of my fellow committee members, when Glenn mentions a June air unit, it's a forced air system, like you have in your house, a furnace that, blows warm air, but it's zoned. So you provide the warm air to this room, or you blend warm air and return air to get the temperature you want over here, temperature you want in that classroom. And when you build a building around the HVAC design, you have to be very careful when you go in there to make a change. And, when I see something like this that is just, oh, it's old, let's replace it, it's quite a bit more, there's quite a bit more consideration that has to be put into what somebody who is not familiar with the intricacies of system design in relationship to the building would be. So you got to take things with a little grain of salt when you see statements like that. When you see caulking needs to be replaced, and you take a picture of the caulking, and concrete, the steps broken, the rubber roof is worn out, torn, whatever, been patched 10 times. Those are common maintenance needs to any building, very specific to a building that is complicated, though, is the HVAC design. That's the most complicated part of the building. Electrical can be upgraded, electrical can be replaced based on the building needs. We spent a lot of money upgrading South in the year 2000 because everybody was going to laptops. And, it was putting a big drain on the building. They weren't sure they were going to have enough power going forward because that's the nature of, everybody had PCs, then everybody's having laptops, now we have iPads. So we're kind of going in the other direction. So we got to go with the flow at times. But, when you start with a base building, it's a little bit different when you take a look at the original intent of the building was. So there was a number that I noted in here for $500,000 to replace fans. Is that like the June air fans? Do you have any idea what Siemens was referring to and what?
That wasn't actually Siemens. I talked to my HVAC techs, and them are those fan units in the field house at South High
yeah.
School, along with that mammoth unit that sits on the science wing, driver's ed. That's what they were talking about there, Steve.
Oh, okay.
Was those.
All right. Yeah, those field house units were last worked on in 2000, I think. New motors, cleaned up and whatnot, but, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So when I look at this study, to me, there's some significant dollars there that are, again, I know they're estimates and there's contingency associated with it, but when you look at things like exterior, those dollars are probably gonna be spent to a certain degree. To me, that's just almost maintenance that, you're gonna have to replace pavement and sidewalks and keep your exterior in good condition. So that's right now, that's totaling $6 million for all our buildings combined. When I look at one of our buildings, our more expensive building here is the place that we feel that we shouldn't really be in, which is Lindholm. You know, that's estimated at 2.6 million, which $1 million for HVAC, and this building is just the wrong building to be in, and we should be out of it. So we have to look at the combination of the money we have to expend to cover those items that have to be covered, like exterior items, and maybe take on a couple HVAC projects rather than trying to, you know, so we can do it, as Steve recommends, more of a structured way of bid out and build the spec arrangement for maybe one project and see how it goes. And to me, that would make more sense than just running out and saying, oh, we gotta do all this stuff, let's go find money. That just doesn't cut it, really. And I'm sure that's not the way, that's not the way we approached even the Siemens project. We pared that back a great deal, and part of it was saying, they came in and said, oh, replace all these lights, and we said, well, we've been replacing lights, so we pulled that back out of there because they just made a blanket, you know, light replacement plan that we pretty much had already done most of that, so there wasn't any reason to head down that path, so.
One other thing, and just to draw on the point you were making, this is just a snapshot of all of our, this isn't a financing plan. A lot of these things, and I don't know the dollar amount yet, can we be done via our normal operational budget? Now, at our current level, can we do a lot of this work? Probably not, but tonight's meeting really was, again, going back to building up a lot of foundational information. So when we start those budget discussions in February, you'll have this as a reference point when we start talking about funding, you know, what are our priorities in maintenance, what, you know, what things should we target? So I'm not here to say that the roofs are collapsing. It's not that kind of a report. It's just, we have needs out there. That's all I really want you to take from this report. We're in good overall condition for the status quo. Now, you get into the curriculum and what people want and all those other things, you could have 100 different viewpoints on that, but this does not net out what Glenn can fund via his operational budget as it stands now.
Joe.
Yeah, I mean, just along those lines, I just did a quick, let's just round up, if we spend $1.5 million each year over 10 years, it's $15 million. We're looking at $42 million altogether, so we're roughly about a third. If, you know, just as we kind of plot along now, we know that, you know, there's priorities that we have to set within here. That's where the strategy and the plan comes along. So this is a great snapshot, though. This was easy to understand. I was able to get my hands around this pretty quickly. This was the best summary we've had in a long time in front of us to say, here's where we're at. Now we can start to talk about the strategy where okay, we know that we have this that we've identified, but we have this much money. And so where do the priorities come in, and what are the strategies to meet those needs, and which are the most important needs? I mean, typically your 5-year plan, Glenn, that you've been working on have been the highest priorities. These are the things that we want to take care of before we start to spend more money because we haven't taken care of those things. Is that pretty much true, Glenn?
That's accurate.
Yeah, so.
The best we can.
Yeah, so, you know, I think the prioritization in the plan is really what the key is gonna be, and that this is a good starting point, though. This is a good, I think, base, and that's what we're looking for. How do you take that, 4 inches and all the other information that, your predecessors have had and put it together in something that's meaningful? That's what's been lacking, is the meaningfulness. There's been data there. We've looked at data, and the other thing that's been, lacking, in my opinion, has been the strategic side of it, and the planning and looking out, and tying it to our budgeting process, not have it just kind of be the separate discussion and we kind of drop it. So I'm looking forward to that integration into the budgeting process here.
Mr. Edlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the next step from here ought to be long-range planning. My biggest concern out there right now is we kind of, have left in limbo for years and years the Harvey Phillips building, and now it's sitting there vacant. But there's a lot of considerations with that building. For instance, the heating plant for that building, which we keep the building turned way down, also feeds Saratoga and the services building. So if we tore that building down, we'd have to replace the heating systems that cover half of Saratoga. And for Glenn's part two, because the boiler would be super hugely oversized, which I imagine it doesn't cycle that much right now. So I think, you know, as a district, I'd kind of like to hear some direction from administration on where we're going with the STEM program at Saratoga. My personal opinion is Glenn and his crews did a great job on the interior of that school, but the exterior isn't. It's sad. You know, that canopy was identified in this report is rusted and looks ugly and it's ready to fall off. Not that bad, but it's, you know, it's in bad shape. And there are a number of items around the exterior of that school that reflect that canopy. And I'm just going to throw this out there, but, you know, when we do a remodel to the extent that we did on Saratoga, I wish we would do a complete remodel so that we don't have to deal with fixing this sidewalk and patching this and caulking the windows. You know, if we could take out a short-term loan and, you know, if it fits within the budget to be able to do that, we don't have a lot of, you know, long-term debt, financing some of these projects to really make a school be as attractive as it possibly can is my idea of long-term planning. And, you know, if that's, you know, 1 school year, 2 schools a year, our buildings as identified in this plan are, you know, they need a facelift, quite frankly. But that's just my opinion.
I think the problem is, you can look at Whittier too. I mean, Whittier, you know, they aren't the STEM program, but that's a school that has needs. There's no doubt about it.
Correct.
And we packed kids into there when we created the STEM program, and it's the school that people don't choice to, unfortunately, and there's a reason for that. It hasn't been maintained properly. It's been, if you look at the condition of the outhouse building to the back, should be torn down. We have a $2.2 million bill with Whittier alone. Its exterior bill is not that high, $105,000. Well, I'd say if tearing down that building would take down most of that $105,000, or redoing it, or whatever you do with that thing. So we don't have a 4K program at Whittier like we probably should, considering the demographics there. It'd be nice to have a community 4K program. And you can go from school to school to school. With a few exceptions, everyone has a case to make, right?
Exactly.
So I think long-term plan to me is saying, okay, how can we handle as much as we can out of our ongoing budget? Okay, reserves, as you talked about a number of times, Steve, handle as much as we can out of reserves. But I'm not a borrow and spend guy. You know, I don't take on debt, pay it out of continuing funds. That's the way this country's gotten into deep financial trouble, and I don't believe in the school district going that route either. So if we have a legitimate need and we've exhausted all of the resources, then we'll go to the community and ask them what we do. But we have to have a good case, and it has to be just like it was with the successful referendum back in 2001. It's about the situation we're in today, with as good as this district is, maintenance-wise and facility-wise, is because of that successful referendum way back when. If we hadn't had that, our buildings would be in a lot worse shape. So,
$24 million, wasn't it, at the time? 24.
yeah,
24.5%.
and I'm not saying, and I want to make sure we plan our resources long-term, so we don't have to go for that kind of money if at all possible, but down the road, there will come a time where we will say we need to restructure this district in a big way. One of them is Lindholm, one of them is Harvey Phillips, and with everything, if we're going to still be the type of district we are today, there's going to be other schools that are going to need services besides Saratoga, but Saratoga will be needing them just as well as everybody else. So.
I can appreciate what you're saying, Steve, that, you know, we have to, the lay of the land has changed in terms of being competitive. You were talking about the outside of the building and having them look attractive, and when people are considering moving into a new community, one of the top two things that they're looking at, if not the number one thing, is where are their children going to be educated. You know, so, you know, people are doing research now. The internet's available to more readily do research very quickly. And, you know, ever since Act 10's come along, competition between school districts has risen. And, you know, we need to be competitive from an HR perspective. We've tackled that one, I think, pretty well over the last few years. Hiring the right staff, retaining the right staff, that's a good part of the education. And, you know, safety of our children and where they're educated, that's another thing that they look at. So as we enter and we continue to move along in Act 10, we need to figure out ways, and what this plan ought to be looking at is how do we continue to be competitive. And competitive, too, is keeping property taxes down. You know, so, yeah, if everyone wants to have skyrocketing property taxes, we can take care of virtually everything on this list and then some. We could keep adding to it forever. So we have the responsibility to really do this in a manner, put together a plan where we are looking at how competitive we are, what are residents looking at when they're looking for a good education for their students and or for their children, and they're looking for a community to move to. And we got to do that in a financially responsible way, which was what Mr. O'Brien was talking about, is let's figure that out from a strategic perspective over time, getting to our long-term plan, which is what we've been asking for quite some time. So we're looking forward to pulling many of those components together that this committee has been talking about for a number of years, and we appreciate these components, these two pieces of information, enrollment and the summary of the studies, really serve, I think, as a good basis there.
And when you look at this district, I mean, versus, let's just take Muskego, I've been in some of those buildings, and you're talking about buildings that, you know, and they struggle to get money to try and reconfigure their district.
They've tried and tried.
They've tried and tried, and unless they promise some big carrot to somebody for some one big building, they don't have success. And that's why their elementary schools are in such disarray. Look, our worst elementary school looks like a Taj Mahal compared to some of the stuff I've seen over there, and it's just that the community hasn't buckled down and say, hey, you know, we need to take care of these issues. And our community has, traditionally, and has been forceful about doing it out of ongoing funds as much as possible. I think that's been always as long as you've been on the board, that's always been your position, and I agree. I think most people on this board agree with that. But as we go through this, learning has changed since that referendum passed. Now we have all this individualized learning, we have STEM demand. Having STEM in one facility, maybe we'll end up with it in 2 or 3. Maybe that's part of the long-term plan. Maybe we'll end up with more STEM-like things, but more on the liberal arts type side of the equation. It might mean a whole reconfiguring of the district academic-wise as we try to stay ahead of the curve versus our overseas competition. I think this district is ahead of the curve right now. When I go, you know, I get outside the country. I was in Asia last week, and I'll tell you what, they don't have a STEM program in their schools. They don't have kids being innovative. They don't have people being innovative. Why? Because our educational culture, our community culture, drives innovation, not only within kids in school, but amongst families, your parents, your mentors. So there's a big advantage we have in this country, but we have to continue to be at the top of our game if we want to continue to be there 10, 20, 30 years from now. You know, we don't need to, we want Waukesha to be a place where GE says, I don't want to leave here. Instead of saying, well, I can move my jobs to Canada, which, you know, so. Mr. Edlin.
Yes, Mr. Clark, for the benefit of maybe not everybody might know of Fund 46, could you explain that to everybody? I've read enough about it to understand it and think it's a great tool.
Yeah, actually, I have it,
ties into this?
I have it scheduled to come to you in January as a topic of conversation, because I think it's a tool we should be utilizing. It's similar to Fund 41. Fund 41 that we're already utilizing with Glenn's maintenance budget. And with that, there's a equalization aid advantage. It takes your expended, when you're negative aided like we are, and it spreads it out over a period of time, so that aid impact is, rather than a one-year hit, it's spread over the number of years you've levied into that fund. So the problem with Fund 41 is you have to decide when you implement your budget and do your final tax levy certification, that's the amount you're putting into that fund. Now you're restricted, it has to be tied to maintenance, those types of things. What Fund 46 does is, and it's got some strange rules tied to it to get it started, it's a fund that you can transfer money in at any time during the year. It's not tied to a specific action. It's not tied to a specific amount. You can get to year end and say, you know what, we want to, let's say we're adding $100,000 to fund balance. We want to put $50,000 of that into Fund 46. It still has the maintenance requirement to it that Fund 41 does, but you have that luxury of being able to make that choice as information becomes available. That on the aid side of it, and I don't think that should be a determining factor on whether you utilize it or not, you're actually hit with the aid at the moment you transfer the money into it, unlike Fund 41 where the aid impact is when you expend the money. We have the pieces in place. One of the requirements is a long-term maintenance plan. We can use Glenn's 5-year plan that we have in this document. But you also, when you start that fund, you cannot spend from it for a 5-year period. And that's kind of the oddity. So what I was, not to show you what I was going to bring you in January, but since we're talking about it, what I did in McGuanago is we transferred $10,000 in there just to get that 5-year. You don't have to fund your whole study. You just have to put some amount of money into the fund to get that 5-year timeline started. And we have 5 years to discuss, you know, I think we should be setting aside money for long-term maintenance as a budgetary process every year. Fund 46 can be that tool. So a lot more detail will come, but that's kind of the quick snapshot of the two. The differences between the two, I think they're both, there's no reason not to implement Fund 46 in my mind. You can choose how much you want to utilize it. You know, it's a nice flexible tool for you to address maintenance costs.
Okay, any other questions on the facility study report? I'm sure we'll have more of this, and it'll have to be an ongoing thing. I myself need to do some more studying on it and question asking as well. But if nothing, now I want to make sure I don't want to call the meeting early like I did last time. Is that it for tonight?
I don't see anything else.
I don't see anything else on the agenda. If I add something now, I'm in trouble, so I guess we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.